What's going on, everyone? This is Sam here from Bigfoot Books, offering some commentary on No Man Knows My History, Chapter 4, A Marvelous Work and a Wonder, which you may or may not have just listened to my recording of the text. Let's talk about it. This is the chapter in which we learn a little bit about the process through which the Book of Mormon was transmuted from a series of stories and ideas swirling around in Joseph Smith's consciousness into a tangible book that can be sold, and in the case of Joseph Smith, that they desperately needed the profits from. We start talking about Martin Harris, and really the only thing that I want to add to this is just I would not want the truth claims or the moral superiority of my organization to rest on the testimony of Martin Harris. This guy seems just really ignorant. It's not clear to me through which avenues Martin Harris made the wealth that allowed him to be so financially supportive to Joseph Smith. I'm assuming he inherited some sort of landed gentry from his ancestors that he just happened to come upon, because it does not sound like from this book or any other that I've encountered that Martin Harris was an exceptionally intelligent person capable of making that money on their own. Maybe that's harsh. I don't know. But it just seems like this dude, and the more we learn about him in other sources, for example, that he was basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he said he has as much evidence for the Book of Mormon as I do for the Shakers or all these other groups. Basically, he was super hot on Mormonism during this period of its infancy, but later on he kind of goes off into some esoteric left field type stuff that puts him at odds with Joseph Smith. So just a really interesting story. This idea of taking an entire religion on faith through hearsay, which is basically how all religions work, is that someone claims that they've had some supernatural experience, and it's up to them to convince other people that that experience is worth paying attention to or following the dictates after. Because in the case of Joseph Smith, let's say you do believe his story that he saw God and Jesus Christ in the sacred grove, well, that may very well be true, that he had some sort of a altered state of consciousness in which he really genuinely felt that was an experience that was taking place. But why should we continue to listen to them henceforth? He says himself, Joseph Smith, that the revelations he receives are, quote, pure intelligence. Basically, his consciousness is filled with not just one, but thousands of light bulbs going off at once. Is kind of his method of receiving these revelations, which become increasingly convenient as different things and obstacles get in the way of the Book of Mormon being created and published. So I talk about hearsay because we've got these two different accounts about the meeting between Martin Harris and the professor of Columbia College, Charles Anthon, which is a story that gets touted about a lot in Mormon circles. It's a very faith-promoting story to hear Martin Harris bring this sheet of documents, of characters, these reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics, and then he shows it to Charles Anthon, and according to him, he goes, yeah, this is super authentic. And then Martin Harris goes, well, great, because as it happens, this was delivered unto us via an angel, yada, yada, yada. And then Charles Anthon rips it up. Well, according to Charles Anthon, there's a completely different series of events that unfurled, basically, that he was given the paper to take a look at, and basically, in his opinion, it was really evident that whoever produced this document of characters had a variety of different sources from which he was drawing, and basically called his bluff. Charles Anthon goes, yeah, I mean, I don't really know what you have here, but it's not super significant one way or the other. So, what does Fawn Brody do about this? She does concede that regardless of these two different accounts of what happened, the fact is Martin Harris returned from his meeting with Charles Anthon, and he's ready to risk it all. He's ready to totally put all of his chips in, put all of his eggs into this one basket. And he's basically going to finance Joseph Smith for as much as he can. And I find it really interesting that Joseph was able to come up with this Isaiah chapter 29, verse 11 and 12 about the man saying, "I cannot read a sealed book." Now, my first time as I was reading this, I really was tempted to say, oh my gosh, that's like kind of amazing that Joseph Smith, he must have really known his Bible, and he must have been so in tune with the story that he was able to produce this scripture. I have a feeling, I'm tempted to say, that what's more likely the case is that this was totally retrofitted in the same way of, like Nostradamus or any of these future prophecies. It'd be an interesting challenge to see if you can think of any event in your life that you've done and go back into the Mormon scriptures, the Doctrine and Covenants, the Book of Mormon, the Old and New Testament, and see some of these prophecies and see if there's anything that you've done in your life that sounds remotely like you had uniquely fulfilled a prophecy. That might be an interesting challenge to do. Nevertheless, Joseph Smith is capable of stringing Martin Harris along, and when you learn more about the context in this chapter about just how destitute Joseph Smith is, he's got a wife. Their first child dies in childbirth, does not survive. And they are just destitute, and Joseph Smith's parents, how embarrassing. Later in the chapter talks about how his parents got evicted from their farm. They couldn't pay rent. They were foreclosed upon, and so they had to go live with Hiram Smith, go live at that place. And so we've got a lot of people. This is not just a mission to bring forth the word of God. There are parties and entities that have vested interest in Joseph Smith bringing this book to a publisher and actually selling copies. It's not a let's get a PDF of this document uploaded to the cloud and share it with everyone. Of course, they didn't have that technology, right? But it was, we're going to make this book, and the book contains all of these local philosophical, political intrigues, the Masons that we'll get into later, and we want to make this book as interesting as possible for everyone in this local area so that we can sell a copy to every family in this valley and make enough money to support ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with bringing about good works and good creative things and earning a living through your own honest labor. But I think it's pretty clear that what's going on here is a bit more complicated than that. I'm reminded, going back to Martin Harris, of this idea of these serial entrepreneurs that you see on YouTube, these sales gurus. You know what I'm talking about. They roll up on their YouTube channel in a Bentley, and they're wearing the suit with the pocket square, and they portray themselves as having this elaborate, rich lifestyle due to their brilliant sales method that for just $499 you can take their workshop. I feel like Martin Harris is it's kind of the same thing here. It says that basically he comes back from the Charles Anthon thing saying he was determined that the book should be published though it consumed all his worldly substance. This dude is in hook, line, and sinker. Whatever Joseph Smith is saying to him, he is buying. And so that's the thing that came to my mind. And then later, Martin Harris, this is not the last time that Martin Harris will be this excited about a religious movement that is not Mormonism. So all that to say, we've got this very interesting character in Martin Harris who, in my opinion, is probably not the guy you want to bet on as far as being a super reliable. This is kind of embarrassing. I think he's kind of a buffoon. The South Park episode, makes him look especially confounded and just kind of in a stupor of thought all the time, etc. So they talk a little bit about Joseph Smith looking into his rocks. I did think it was very interesting that Martin Harris admitted, at least on one occasion, to trying to trick Joseph into using the wrong rocks. You know that these people were in this room. Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, Emma Smith, Martin Harris, all these people, David Whitmer. You know that these people have to have at least at one point had enough self-awareness to go, man, am I being duped right now? I mean, if you think about just all the implications of bringing the Book of Mormon forth, I think it's especially fishy that Joseph has this kind of ultimatum for anyone that is going to help bring forth the Book of Mormon, that like God will smite you down if you deign to look upon the plates with your own eyes. You will suffer the day, and this kind of you can help me with the Book of Mormon, but if you want like more proof that I'm not just stringing you along, well, then God will destroy you. I think that's a little bit too convenient, personally. You can come to your own conclusion about that, I suppose. But for me, that's like a huge red flag of this. And also, Martin Harris says that they were 40 to 50 pounds. I just bought a 25-pound dumbbell at Walmart the other day. And 40 to 50, that's heavy. You've got these stories of like Joseph trying to hide the plates from prying eyes, and it sounds like when Martin Harris's wife was in town, she was kind of going through the medicine cabinet and such. 50 pounds, that is big. That is not insignificant amount of weight. So, let's see here. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I mentioned earlier that like they had a vested interest in bringing this book to pass. It says that when Joseph lost the 116 pages and they were destroyed, he was kind of pouty for a few weeks. And I guess I can't blame him. But it says, I'll quote Fawn Brody again, "To admit that the whole story of the golden plates was a mere figment of his dreaming would be to destroy Emma's faith in him forever. It would mean the end of Harris's patronage and the undying contempt of his father-in-law, upon whom he would probably have to depend for a livelihood. His father's family was counting on the sales of the Book of Mormon to prevent foreclosure on their farm, since they had no money for a final payment. A retreat from the fantasy that he had created was impossible." Man, so there's like at least 4 different parties that are going to be extremely let down if Joseph can't get his act together and get the Book of Mormon published. You've got basically his marriage will be in shambles, that the person financing him, keeping him on his feet, keeping him clothed and fed, Martin Harris, is not going to stick with him. His father-in-law, who he already has a pretty rocky history with, is basically going to make matters even worse. And on top of all of this, his father, he's going to watch his mother and father get evicted for having their property foreclosed upon. So these are not like insignificant things. Those are a lot of real pressures on Joseph. Now, I think the immediate parallel for me, if you're into musicals, is Dear Evan Hansen, right? It's like this. You start with this idea that you're going to do something and you think it's going to be good, and then you tell us a couple white lies, and those white lies become bigger lies, and then you have to start lying to cover up the lies, sort of a thing. And so I think we're seeing Joseph Smith get into somewhat of a pickle here. The difference between Evan Hansen and him is, if you know that story, well, I mean, the difference is Joseph Smith knew the Book of Mormon wasn't what he claimed it was from the get-go. very clear when we learn more about like the Masons in this chapter and how the entire story narrative of the Book of Mormon of the Gadianton robbers is so clearly a parallel. It's not even trying to disguise it. It was something that was being talked about. Fawn Brody mentions that it felt nice for once that rural upstate New York was kind of the center of attention in national news, because that probably didn't happen super often. And so when you look at stuff like that, come on. I love how when he gets stuck in these pickles, we're starting to notice this pattern of Joseph Smith getting revelations, and they're so convenient. And whenever he doesn't know how to solve a problem, or whenever there's quarreling between members of the early church, he goes, "Oh, I know. I'll ask for a revelation." And he's so eloquent. There's these. It really does sound like some, cosmically mature being saying these things. The works and the designs and the purposes of God cannot be frustrated, neither can they come to naught, for God doth not walk in crooked paths. I mean, this is pretty, it sounds somewhat prophetic, I have to admit, but we are capable of using language to produce effects in people. Language is just a collection of phonetic instances that we create using our larynx and tongue and teeth and lips and stuff to create different sounds that can influence our emotions. And so I thought of, when I was reading that Joseph Smith had all these eloquent revelations that people believed genuinely was from the voice of God, I think of something like Donda, the album by Kanye West that came out a few months ago, and there's that song, Praise God, and it's quoting his own mother, Donda West, and she says, "Even if you are not ready for the day, it cannot always be night." And then this awesome beat drops, and then it's just like a really good Kanye song. But I just, a lyric like that can have that profound, especially the way that Kanye West mixes that lyric with this really epic bass and songwriting. All I mean to say in bringing that up is that it's not hard for a creative person to come up with language and art and creative works that can instill within us a sense of divine awe and appreciation. So it's very possible that Joseph Smith really was capable of convincing people he was speaking as the voice of God, but he was just a good, gifted orator. That's really all it comes down to. If you're the kind of person like myself that's skeptical that he was a genuine prophet speaking to God, that I think is a useful way to kind of get around this apologetic that how could someone that is just a mortal human sound so profound? Well, lots of people do it. I think Fawn Brody had a lot of fun writing some of this. Talking about the revelations, it's in the 116 lost pages, she says, "In his boundless wisdom, however, the Lord had foreseen this contingency and provided a set of small plates." So Fawn Brody, I think, is overwhelmingly, almost to a fault, is pretty fair with Joseph Smith. Sometimes I think too fair, but stuff like this betrays, that she's at her typewriter making this manuscript and kind of giggling, right? I mean, it's just so convenient that God had a backup plan. He knew that they were going to lose the 116 pages, and it's really silly. And it talks about how basically the word gets out that Joseph can give these revelations on behalf of people, and so he becomes somewhat of the newspaper, like Ask Eddie or whatever, the write-in column, and then he gives the advice to everyone. So he's developing this reputation with families and friends in the area of being somewhat of an oracle for the neighborhood, to receive revelations on behalf of people. I'm imagining if you're Joseph Smith, that probably feels pretty cool. That's a lot of power in your hands to basically like give people horoscopes or words of counsel or if you convince people that you're legit, what is stopping Joseph Smith from saying, I need you to listen to the voice of the Lord who says unto you, give all of your property to the church, and give your 14-year-old daughter unto Joseph Smith for an eternal sealing or whatever. That's where it becomes more insidious, because it's one thing to be like, oh, Joseph, would you mind giving me a little hint about how my weekend might go, versus hey, I've prayed and received a revelation from God that you need to go on a mission so that I can marry your wife and daughter, stuff like that. Pretty crazy. I enjoyed reading the account of Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream, juxtaposed with the 1 Nephi chapter 8 vision of the tree of life, and just to see yet another instance of things happening in Joseph Smith's real existence that filtered into the experience of the Book of Mormon. Another thing is that, talking about the Gadianton robbers, this idea that the Nephites had this really elaborate democracy with judges and bureaucracy and things that didn't exist during the time that the Book of Mormon was written. Those types of not the 1800s, but the time that the Book of Mormon characters were supposed to have lived. That kind of political development didn't happen at that part of history in that part of the world with those existing peoples. So that's just super, to me, that's a huge, not a red flag, but just a huge, it's a really glaring hole in the narrative that the Book of Mormon was a genuine thing that happens. And it talks about how the book is pretty boring, and that the characters are pretty cookie cutter. They're not super dense or intellectual. It's just talking heads giving sermons and things like that. I found it interesting on my mission, talking about the Catholic Church and how the Book of Mormon makes abundantly clear. The 1 Nephi chapter 13, where he's the angel is showing him the great and abominable church, the whore of all the earth. I don't know what the Come Follow Me or correlated church manuals are teaching about those verses now. I know that when I was growing up, I know that my parents' generation, with especially Mormon doctrine, Bruce R. McConkie, all throughout my entire mission, there was no question that this was about the Catholic Church. My understanding is that they are trying to move away from this, because it's pretty awful stuff to say about the Catholic Church. And don't get me wrong, I have no problem running the Catholic Church through the mud. They deserve to be criticized in a lot of ways, but it's just super funny that in the 20th century, particularly, the Mormons were growing so much in the 70s, 80s, etc. They were so confident that the church was the one true church that they had no problem basically dunking on every other religion, saying all their creeds are an abomination. Remember, that's what God says to Joseph Smith. The creator of the universe goes to Joseph Smith and says, every single church on this faith is an abomination. Not kind of wrong, but absolutely making a mockery of my divinity, and you have been called to restore the true church on this earth. And the Catholic Church is seen as one of the major antagonistic forces that brings about the apostasy, that brings about the Dark Ages. And it just bothers me so much that the church does so much to, try to build rapport with other religions. We will go to the international faith councils, and on my mission, I went to interfaith breakfasts for Thanksgiving or whatever. So you got the evangelicals and the pagans and the rabbis and the Mormons and the Catholics, etc., all having their little lunch together. But it's you go to church on Sunday, and then it's oh, we're going to read today about how Nephi saw the Catholic Church whoring itself across the entire earth. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Another huge, glaring red flag in the narrative of the Book of Mormon supposedly being a literal existing thing is that there's these copycat stories Fawn Brody brings up, like Salome from the New Testament. You got Aminadai, like Daniel, deciphered handwriting on a wall. Like, we know that the story of Daniel, for example, I believe the main scholarly consensus is that that is not an actual event. So not only are we pretty confident that that was just a story to begin with, we've got Joseph Smith creating these like copycat stories. Even as a faithful member, I remember reading about these little copycat stories in the book of Jared or the book of Ether, sorry, and just being like, that's kind of interesting. Alma being converted the same way St. Paul, that one makes more sense with the angel. I didn't have a problem with that one, but definitely Daniel and Salome, those it's unmistakable that Joseph was like, yeah, I think I could. I don't get why he didn't think anyone would see through that, because I definitely do. Yep, we talked about the Gadiant, and so that's basically it. I definitely encourage you to consider for yourself, what would it take for someone to convince you that the project that they're working on, if it's like for work or for some sort of creative outlet, what would it take for a person to convince you to drop all of your hobbies, all of your time, and like give of yourself to someone's work? What kind of marvelous work and a wonder do you think would get you to drop your nets and follow him or whatever? That's an interesting thing to think about. I think we get so caught up in the narrative of our own lives that it's easy for us to, become selfish or self-absorbed maybe. But one thing's for sure, I think if someone came to me today and basically gave me the narrative that Joseph Smith gave to, like, Martin Harris, for example, I would be super incredulous. I would definitely, I personally would take huge issue with the fact that not only, like, you don't even have the plates on the table and you're looking at these magic stones, but you're telling me if I try to find these plates that God will destroy me, even though I'm one of the only people that's willing to, like, help you do this absurd thing? I don't know. It's just weird. So consider that. This has been really fun for me to record. I hope you enjoyed this recording, and looking forward to doing chapter 5 soon. So thanks. Take care.